Schwartz here from Sales for Nerds, kicking off the Sales for Nerds podcast. If you feel more comfortable with SQL than sales calls, more at home writing test suites than proposals, more interested in crunching numbers than shaking hands, if you think networking should be about routers rather than cocktails with strangers, if you're more interested in debating code editors than negotiating deals, but somehow you ended up responsible for some of those sales and marketing activities, this is the podcast for you.
Today, I'm super excited to have Caleb Sidel, a Salesforce certified technical architect and co-founder of Strategic Growth, a Salesforce consultancy, join me on Sales for Nerds. We're going to get into why this is a fun, small world experience in a minute, but for right now, let me just give you a little bit of Caleb's background. He's been working on the Salesforce platform for over 10 years. That's I think almost as old as this, maybe as old as the Salesforce platform itself, in Apex and Visualforce and app development and web services and so on and so forth. And he spent 4 years at Salesforce itself before striking out on his own, and is now at one of the leading Salesforce implementation partners. He graduated from Carnegie Mellon with a bachelor's degree in mathematics and computer science, so it doesn't really get much more hardcore techie than that. He also has a minor in French, which is actually going to come into play in a little bit. And he's got a long list of certifications on Salesforce that I would read off to you, but really we don't have enough time to go through the whole thing. And so Caleb and I used to work together back in the day at Trilogy. And at one point he was on a project in France and he asked for help. And he said, please, can someone come out and give us some assistance with this project? And I thought that I was probably not the front of the line to do that, but the people at the front of the line were all busy doing other stuff. So I managed to go out and join Caleb in France. And we had a great time. I learned a lot. I tried to speak French. And one thing I learned is that you're supposed to drink wine not only at dinner, but also at lunch. So in honor of that, we have a Chateau Tessier 2012 Montagne Saint-Emilion, I'm not even saying this right, from France. And I think I picked it up at Costco. It's not a super expensive fancy Bordeaux, but we'll see how it tastes. Caleb, welcome.
Thanks, Ruben. Thanks for having me.
And we're going to pour a little wine here.
Smells good.
And that is the sound, of course, of the aerator that we tested back, I think, in episode 4.
Nice.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, that works for me. Very French.
Very nice.
But not
nice.
Too like dirty pond.
No, very smooth.
But it's got a little bit of earth to it. And Caleb was nice enough to prepare a plate of cheese and crackers in anticipation of this interview. So that's kind of nice. So anyway, diving in, how did you go from somebody who is basically as techie as it gets and not someone, with all due respect, that I would have pegged as a super successful salesperson to, in effect, a super successful salesperson?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. It wasn't like it's not like this was planned.
That keeps coming up again and again in these interviews.
So I don't know. It just kind of happened organically. Well, I guess, first of all, I started out right out of college as supposedly being this, super hardcore developer stuck in the back of a room, seeing nothing but lines of code. But when we met at Trilogy, in those days, it was all about taking these developers and putting them in front of customers. Right? We're doing, large scale implementations and crazy custom stuff, but for a customer. And so that was really my first introduction to talking to people. Right. And being out there and saying, hey, what do you want to do? What do you want to accomplish? How do you want to get this done? And that actually pairs really well with development skills, I think. I had a lot of fun, traveled a lot of different places, saw a lot of different customers, implemented a lot of different stuff. Did that at Trilogy, did that at Waveset, did that at Sun Microsystems and Salesforce. And it was really about meeting customer needs through code. Right. So it was developing, it was being a developer, but for a person or a group or an individual or, a customer at the time. And then, I don't know, it just seemed to just happen that instead of being the person that was developing stuff for the customer, I was the person that was liaising, is that a word?
It is now.
Great. Liaising with the customer to say, look at this great stuff we can do, right? So it wasn't just about like, hey, customer, what do you want? Let me go build it. But more about, hey, look at this cool stuff we can do for you. Have you thought about doing this thing or that thing? And then the more and more customers, of course, the more and more real world experience of doing the thing, right? And then the customers don't necessarily say, hey, I want you to do X or Y. And it wasn't just all about, have you thought about this? It was more about, this seems to be a trend. This seems to be a best practice. People seem to be doing this thing. And then that sort of leads to, well, if people seem to be doing this thing that I'm building for you, why don't I sell you on this thing? Right? Convincing the customer that it's in their best interest to do this, not because I was selling a good, right? I wasn't selling a widget.
Right.
I wasn't even selling software. But even when I was working for a software company like Salesforce, it was about selling what you could do with the product, either with custom code or just out of the box.
So basically, if I'm recapturing this correctly, you went from, I'm a developer, I'm in a meeting with people, because all developers have to be in meetings one way or another, but I'm in an internal meeting discussing a feature that someone is asking me to write, to I'm with a customer, an external customer discussing a feature they want me to write, to I'm with an external customer or prospect discussing an outcome they want to achieve and figuring out what features might be helpful for them to get there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. No, that's spot on. And then that turns into a little bit even more of, I'm with a customer figuring out what their outcome is that they want, just like you said, and having already built up a library or a repository, or I don't know what, of solutions.
Right.
And I'm not talking code artifacts. I'm talking about just concepts and design artifacts.
Like if I want to reduce turnover, or if I want to increase time in the field for my sales team or whatever, here's a set of common things that might be useful for that.
Yeah, here's what other people have done. Here's what I've seen other people do. And here's some solutions that have worked well for others that I've seen. Would you like to try this one or that one? It's always about giving options, but instead of just asking the customer, the sky's the limit, saying, hey, here are two nice options that I've seen work really well in this type of a scenario.
So again, it's sort of about moving up to higher levels, maybe going back to the coding analogy of abstraction. So you start off and you say, gosh, you want this feature. Here are some ways we can implement that feature. And then here are some libraries that I'm familiar with that let me implement more powerful features more quickly, all the way up to here are sort of the solutions that might involve chunks of code, but they're really business solutions that you can pull from almost like a technical library.
Yeah, I think that's really it. It's another way to look at it, I guess, would be going from a developer that's looking at lines of code up to the big picture thinker, right? The system architect that's looking at all of the systems and how they interact with each other, right? You're stepping back. It's the 500,000 foot view.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, one thing, so I think that progression makes a lot of sense to people with a technical background, but one thing that is different as you go, especially from an internal meeting to an external meeting, is in an internal meeting, if you say no, or you say, gosh, that doesn't work well, or whatever, like at worst, you get a reputation for being a pain in the ass, and maybe eventually they get rid of you, but they can't just say, okay, we're done, bring in another developer. Whereas when you're in an external meeting, that's actually exactly what they're going to do if they don't like what you have to say. So how do you balance, or how do you make the transition from those internal meetings to the external meetings and balance sort of being able to tell people accurately what they need to hear at the same time in a way that doesn't cause them to say, next, you're out?
Good question. I wish I had an answer for that question, like this is what you should do or this is how you do it. I think it's really about relating to the people you're talking with, right? And finding common ground, because at the end of the day, when you're meeting with that external person, you really want them to be successful, right? You really want their project to be successful. You want their company to be successful. You want that individual to be successful. Hopefully that's what you want. I mean,
right.
That's hopefully your goal. And so if you can really get that across to them and have them really believe that, because it is true, then, you can start to say, build this trust and say, look, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to be helpful. I'm trying to give you an idea of what I think you might like or might want to do, because I think that you might like it and might want to do it. Right? So I think it's really about relating to the people you're talking with. And an internal meeting, you don't necessarily have to build a relationship with that person. I mean, you might be friends, but it's not about relating to them. It's just about listening and doing, and maybe saying no and being a big jerk about it. But when it's external, you really do want to relate to that person and relate to their problems.
That's a great point. And I guess in some ways I wasn't very fair with that, because with the internal group, you probably have a relationship already of some sort. And so you're just focusing on the problem, whereas in the sales cycle, you often don't have a relationship. That's one reason it's so much easier to sell to your existing customers, because you don't have to go through all that trust building all over again. So I know that these are sort of very high-level questions that don't have a simple answer, but maybe what surprised you, or what do you wish you had known as you sort of switched from that internal meeting to the external meetings?
What did I wish I had known? Well, one thing is, I wish I had known in the beginning that it is okay to push back. Because at the very beginning, right, when I was very first dipping the toe in the meet the external people, they would ask the, not impossible, but next to impossible. And my initial reaction was always just, yes, sure, you bet. You want to do that thing? Awesome. And when can I do it? 2 days from now, no problem, right? And 48 hours of no sleep later, right? Here's the thing. But in reality, I found over time that people aren't really asking, can you do this impossible thing, and can you do it tomorrow? They're really just asking, is what I'm asking reasonable? Right? Am I asking for this reasonable thing? And I'm just really curious. When can I expect this new shiny toy? Right. And so I wish someone had kind of told that to me, because now I can look back and say, oh, is that reasonable? Well, maybe we can break it into pieces. Right? That's not unreasonable. Maybe we can give some of that new shiny toy to you now and some a little bit later. And so setting those expectations of what you're going to end up getting, and what's not necessarily possible, or even if it's possible, what little bit of extra functionality seems really cool, but it's going to take a really, really long time and cost a lot to build. The customer would like to know that, right? And so when you're selling something, I think it's nice to be upfront and honest about, here's what you're getting, here's how long it's going to take, and oh, by the way, this extra thing you're asking for, that little piece over here, that's what's going to take the longest and cost the most. Why don't we dial that back? It's not so much a no as a, here, let me inform you about this process and how it works.
And that's where having, first of all, the technical chops to be able to make those assessments is super helpful. And then also, I think, like you're saying, learning to push back and not simply reflexively say yes. That's something I had a problem with as well. And I keep going back to the doctor analogy of, do you really want the doctor who says, eat this cheeseburger and we'll do heart surgery this afternoon? Sure, no problem. Or do you want the doctor who gives you a warning that, hey, that certain things are not possible and here's what I need you to do, and so on and so forth. Now, you've had tremendous success in the Salesforce ecosystem. What is it like working with a partner like Salesforce?
It's been really great. Well, first of all, I really like their product, right? So that helps a lot. And I like it as a developer also, which is fun. I mean, I've integrated to a lot of different systems. I've used a lot of different APIs in my time of being a developer, and I just like their system, right? It's just really nice and friendly to developers, which is me. So that's tremendously helpful. And then as far as partnering with them goes, I think that because I think they have a great product, I'm passionate about selling it along with my services. So that passion comes through, and then that passion bleeds into the partnership with them. So when I'm working with Salesforce as a partner, they can tell I'm passionate about it. And so they reciprocate, right? And they're grateful that I'm really on board and I really like what they're doing. And it's also nice because we've established this really nice relationship where when things go a little wonky.
Wait, things go wonky in a project? No way.
Yeah, with software. It happens sometimes. Though I do write bug-free software, I have to say.
Someone else might have introduced a bug somewhere.
Exactly right. But no, right, exactly. When something goes wonky, we can go back and have that dialogue with them and have a conversation, and they're really open to it because they're like, oh, here's this Caleb character and he knows what he's doing. So if something's going wonky, it's actually going wonky, right? It's not like the little boy that cried wolf. So it's nice to have that long-term relationship. I know a lot of the developers, I know a lot of the product managers, and I've been building relationships with a lot of the account executives. And so it's been this long-term relationship where we've built a lot of mutual trust. So it's good. It's nice.
And so do they bring you into a lot of deals?
They do. Yep. It's a mutual thing again. They bring us into deals. We bring them into deals because, we both like working with each other. So that's nice too.
And it seems like that's a huge benefit, especially if you are coming from a technical background and you're not sure about, building up your pipeline and a lot of the basic deal flow issues that are a problem. If you are partnering with somebody who has really got a great system for that, i.e. Salesforce. I don't know if anyone has a better one than they do. Right. That's only going to help you. And it seems like a great compliment in the sense that, they have an incredible sales and marketing machine. And at the same time, they can't keep up with the demand for people trying to implement it. And you bring all that technical depth and expertise to their actual projects to make sure their customers are successful.
Yeah, it really works well that way. And I think it's really a great testament to the Salesforce partner program at large that they have with all their partners, that they really try hard to work with their partners at the same way that a partner would work hard for them. And so you get into the partnership or you get out of the partnership what you put into the partnership. And they really, like I said, they work hard to try to make sure that it's a nice equal relationship. And it is nice when you're first starting out, right, to have a relationship with someone like Salesforce, right, who does have a big organization and a well-established organization, and really learn from them too about what's going on and how they're doing things. So it's been nice.
And I think, you talked about learning to push back. And one of the things that I wish I had learned that I should have been paying attention to you when I started consulting was, I should have picked somebody to partner with because I like the technical depth. I can do that. And maybe not right away, but you built up the technical expertise. So you weren't just someone saying, hey, hand me a deal, which is what a lot of these sort of small consulting companies start out as. But you actually brought a lot to the table so that there was mutual exchange of value. And I think that's something where a lot of people who they're probably not ever going to get great at sales, with all due respect, but they can close somebody that they're in a discussion with because they have the passion, they clearly have the expertise. If they have someone who brings them into those deals, they're going to do really well, and the partner's going to do really well, and the customer's going to end up doing really well. And if there's one thing that I would like people to take away from this, it's if you've got someone in your niche or in your market who is a leader, go help them, figure out how to help their customers, and you don't have to reinvent every single part of the wheel like I tried to do.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And, that has been what I've been doing, sort of all along in my career too, just not on my own until recently, right? I mean, when we started at Trilogy, right, where I ended up was in the professional services group, and, we were part of that company that had a product. So we weren't a partner, but it was sort of like on the way to being there, right? I mean, if Trilogy had grown any larger, it probably would have stopped doing professional services internally and spun it off, right? And then same with Waveset and Sun Microsystems, the same sort of concept. It was a product, and they had a professional services arm, and then, that eventually gets spun off. In that case, actually, I went totally independent, so it wasn't, exactly the same thing, but it came, professional services as an outside service. So I think that's really has been really nice for me, is always having a nice product and a nice company to metaphorically partner with, right? Even though at the beginning it was being hired by. And so when, it came time to start something new, i.e. strategic growth, there was that wealth of having these relationships with product companies already.
I think that's something that, we talk about having a niche. That's come up in a lot of episodes. And so one really easy way, if you're trying to figure out what your niche is, if you've got a technology background but not a market background, well, that's fine. The technology can be the niche. That's totally fine.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And it can have a lot of value. And it really, totally depends on the technology and how well you know it and what you want to do with it, right? And it can start out as simple as just independent consulting, right? Which I did, for Sun Microsystems. I was just, freelancing because they had a total not lack, but there was a shortage of consultants for the Lighthouse product. And they were like, oh my gosh, we really need to have consultants. And I was like, oh, I'll just do some independent stuff. Nice little way to dip your toe in the water. If you have some technical expertise and you find this little narrow area of technology that is, in high demand, even within your niche, right? I mean, it could just be, I have a buddy of mine who does finance software, and it only works for banks. And so there are very few customers, as it were, but his skill is in really high demand because there are so few developers in that space. And so that would be, a nice way to say, hey, I'm in a niche.
Right.
Let me go independent in this niche.
And then you have sort of your customers defined for you. You have your pitch defined. You often have people who are helping you sell in the partner ecosystem, and maybe they take a big cut. But, if you don't have to do any significant amount of selling yourself and you just get to work and make good money, there's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly right. And if you're doing something that you love, awesome.
Now, how did you guys decide to say, okay, enough independent consulting, let's go form a consultancy?
That I have to credit to my partners. They really saw the need for consultancies in the Salesforce ecosystem, saw the need for providing a service. And as we talked, they really brought me on board to be the technologist part of the stool. So that was also really nice, right? In that fact that, I might be doing technology, and I'm now doing more sales oriented stuff, which is why I'm here talking to you, but I don't do business, right? I don't do accounting and all sorts of things that are needed to run a business, right?
HR,
right? Exactly. Benefits and all that good stuff. Not my thing. Don't know how. I suppose I could figure it out. I mean, anyone can, I suppose, but I didn't have to because I had really great partners. And so they've really, formed this nice stable stool where we each have our strengths and we are all selling, so that we have in common. I'm the deep technologist, but we also have someone who really knows business in terms of what it takes to create a business. And, Brad Miles, he's the real impetus for strategic growth. He's the one that incorporated strategic growth and really, he started the company as the company itself. And so that's been nice for me that I got to piggyback off of all of his hard work, establishing, the C Corp and all the legal stuff that goes along with starting a company.
And if you want more background on the legal stuff, go back and listen to the episode with Brian Spross on why you need a bunch of legal stuff.
Probably a good idea to have legal stuff.
Yes, they're very important and much more affordable than even I realize these days. So anyway, how did you guys get into the position where you're all selling? Because I know in a lot of these situations, there's like the sales guy and the technology guy. How did it end up that everybody, all the founders are selling?
Well, part of it is the fact that we wanted to be different than everybody else, right? So we wanted to say, hey, we're all technologists, right? I'm a coder developer, whereas Brad and Eric are more configurators of Salesforce, but they're still technical folks. Really hardcore technical folks. We didn't want to lose the aspect of doing Salesforce, using Salesforce, configuring Salesforce, getting it up and running. And we think it makes for a better sales team, right? It makes for better selling, because I think you said just earlier today, hey, it's really good to know when you can push back on what a customer's asking, right? But in order to say, hey, customer, I think you're looking at that this way, maybe you want to look at it that way, it's because you know the tool, you know the piece of software, you know the product, you know the thing really well. And so that's important to us to maintain. And so we want to sell, but we also want to maintain the technical expertise. So we're just doing it all. Right? We're just constantly doing all of it. So there's no one that does just sales, because if someone does only sales, they lose touch with what does the product do? What can I do with it? How can I manipulate it? How can I really configure it and code it? And people are looking at us, customers are looking at us to be a trusted advisor, right? And so when they come in, they say, hey, Caleb, can, I make this, pink pig fly across the screen? I can actually know what it's going to take to do that.
Is that a common request in Salesforce these days?
I haven't gotten that request too often. No, blue pigs maybe, but not pink. No, not often flying pigs.
All right, because there's a lot of stuff you could do with the platform these days. I wasn't sure if I was a little behind on some of the features. So you just said something interesting about how all the founders are selling, but they're also deep in the product, and that you don't have just sort of like a pure sales team. How do you guys find the time to do all this? Because usually most salespeople say, I never have enough time just to sell, let alone learn the products. And you guys are deep into both. How does that work? And is this something that you think is sustainable?
I think it is. Well, part of the reason it's sustainable is that we've scaled our quote unquote sales team, right? So it's not just the three of us that are selling, right? There's more than just us, right? As we've grown, we've hired. But the people we've hired are also not just salespeople. We don't have that role as a pure sales individual.
So these are consultants who can deploy solutions, but also sell solutions?
That's exactly right. Yep. And it takes a while to find folks like that, right? It's not a common skill to say, I like to sell and I like to deploy, right? It's typically one or the other. But we've found folks that like to do both. And it makes for a really great sales cycle because they're building a trusted relationship with the customer, or not even the customer, with the prospect, right? Because they know what they're talking about and they know, what they need to do to generate the sale, right? So they know kind of both sides of that coin. And then how do you balance both? The real answer is with some discipline. So we do have folks that only do delivery as well, right? So there is that role. And so those folks are doing the majority of the delivery, but then there are certain projects that are maybe a rapid deployment that's coming up, or maybe it's a project that is multiple phase. It's going to take some time, but it's not, 10 hours a day, right? Every day, all week long kind of deal. It's more spread out. And so that can fit in with the sales activities. The other side of it is, I don't know, folks that say I don't have enough time to only sell, I would challenge them to say, well, I think there's time, that you don't realize you have that's sitting there, right? That you can go and say, well, as I'm deploying this, I'm honing my skill of technology and it's going to help me sell tomorrow, even though you're not selling today. You're just taking a little break.
Right. It's actually sales training. It's not just product training.
Right. Exactly right. Yeah.
And I imagine it's also a big advantage to be able to say, okay, great, now we've got this contract signed. I'm going to go help you start deploying this stuff, as opposed to I'm going to leave you now for 6 months until it's time for me to sell you something else.
Yeah, certainly. No, that's definitely helpful. And, it's some and some. Sometimes, well, we certainly never leave you for 6 months. That would not be neat.
But that's what happens, right? The account manager or the sales guy closes the deal, the ink is dry, and then he's on to the next thing. And there's this whole separate team that comes in to do the implementation in the typical scenario.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that's different here, and I don't know if it's just us, I think some of it is just us, but some of it's also Salesforce, is that our teams are small. Our teams are typically teams of one, maybe two. So when you go in and someone's selling the deal, they're still involved, that whole thing. Even if a delivery person comes in to do the delivery, the person that's selling the deal is also the acting account manager. So we've really combined the salesperson, the delivery person, and some companies call them the TAM, the technical account manager. All three roles are sometimes one person or sometimes spread across only two, but it's definitely not three.
Okay. And so you mentioned that you've got other consultants who are now doing sales as well. What did you do to help train them on selling?
Well, for us, it really, again, isn't really a focus on selling. We're not trying to be salespeople in the typical sense of, hey, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. We're really just saying, tell me your problem. Oh, that's an interesting problem. Here's how I think you can solve that problem. So again, we're solutioners, right? Isn't this an interesting solution? And oh, by the way, here's how much the solution costs. And in the process of that dialogue, you haven't really sold a thing. What you've done is you've encouraged the customer to like you, like your solution, like the way you're going to build the solution for them. And the sale aspect of it comes sort of secondary to the fact that you're really presenting, this really nifty solution. And you don't have to, I guess it's not so much training on how to sell the thing as how to effectively communicate your solution. And if you're doing that well and connecting to the customer well, or the prospect, I guess, well, then they're like, oh, I get it. Oh, I see your vision. Oh, this is the vision you have for me. Oh, that aligns with the vision that I have for me. And you're like, oh, we're speaking the same language. That sounds really cool. Oh, is that what it's going to take to get me there? Let's do that thing together. And so you're creating a partnership. It's not that you're just, hey, here's a widget, here you go. Here's a solution, here you go. And the salesperson walks away and someone else has to deliver it, right? These consultants that have always built solutions, they're just doing the same thing they've always done. They're just adding to that the idea of presenting the solution in a way that the customer can understand in a, statement of work, right? In a contract.
And this kind of goes back to what you said at the beginning. If you show up and you try to help, like you really just want to help, it's a pretty easy conversation. Whereas if you show up and you think, I've got to make quota, I've got to sell them my widget, no matter what the actual problem is, you're actually going to encounter more resistance. In some ways, it's easier to sell this way because you're not calling it sales. It's like some mental jujitsu you do on yourself that actually also makes you interact better with the prospect.
Yeah. I mean, it's looking at the same problem, just maybe a little differently.
So it sounds like you have a little factory where you basically teach sales for nerds without necessarily thinking of it that way. But that's basically what you're doing. You're saying, don't do sales, go help people. And if you find the right people who have, if you can get in front of people who have the problems that we solve, just go help them solve them. That's kind of the essence of your sales training.
Yeah, that really is. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but yep, that's exactly it.
And then you've also got the advantage of having the partner ecosystem to help you get in front of people who need these problems solved.
That also helps. Exactly right. No.
So I think a lot of times people struggle with this because they're trying to take on the whole funnel. And so they don't have the marketing oomph or the messaging or the niche or whatever to have good prospects. And so they get very desperate when they get in a sales cycle and then they try to sell instead of helping, as opposed to defining the niche, getting in front of the right people, and then just being able to go help and not think about it as sales. Well, how's the wine treating you? Back to the important questions.
The wine is actually really, really nice. Well, as you know, Saint-Emilion is one of my favorite wines. So that helps too.
And I have to thank you for, I believe, turning me on to that way back in the day. So I appreciate that. That's been a real big bonus to my life and after all these years. And before the interview, Caleb and I were lamenting that if you go to France, right, you can get some pretty dirt cheap wine that's really, really good. And when you come here, you spend more money and don't necessarily get such good wine. But this one, I'll put a link in the show notes, but I'm pretty sure you can pick up at Costco for like $12.
Very nice. This is definitely takes me back Good stuff.
We used to, I would be, on the project site all day, and then I would do my regular US-based work at night, and I'd show up in the office the next day exhausted and not feeling real confident because people were talking in French. And then we'd go to lunch, and Caleb said, well, of course we have to get wine for lunch. It was a rough life. Very rough.
It was very, very rough. Yeah. I remember, I'm gonna go there. The day that you showed up in France, in fact, and we had a nice lunch, and then you decided, because we weren't meeting with the customer in the afternoon, to go off and do your own thing. And I remember you came back later and you told me that you had fallen asleep in the restaurant over your nice bottle of wine.
In fairness, we had been working on a release. I had been working 18-hour days for a couple of weeks. I was jet lagged, and had been on a red eye. I have a lot of good excuses for this. But when the guy nudged me and woke me up and asked me if I wanted dessert, I did say yes.
That was good. The food's so good, you have to say yes.
Well, Caleb, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope this is helpful for people. If you're listening to this, do this the smart way. Do it like Caleb did. Don't do it the dumb way like I did, trying to do everything myself and doing it the hard way. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Ruben.